Okay, guys, I want to give you a little history so you guys understand what D Day is and um, what I was saying about um, Normandy, or not Normandy, Normandy invasion. So, the decision to go was May of 1944 had been chosen at the conference in Washington in May of 1943 as the time for an invasion. Difficulties in assembling landing crafts forced a postponement until June, but June 5th was fixed as the unalterable date by Eisenhower on May 17th. As the day approached and troops began to embark for the crossing, bad weather set in, threatening dangerous landing conditions. After tense debate, Eisenhower and his subordinates decided on a 24-hour delay, requiring the recall of some ships already at sea. Eventually, on the morning of June 5th, Eisenhower assured by Chief Meteorologist James Martin Stagg of a break in the weather, announced, "Okay, we'll go." Within hours of an armada of 3,000 landing crafts and 2,500 other ships, and 500 naval vessels, escorts and bombardment ships began to leave English ports. That night, 822 aircrafts carrying parachutes or towing gliders roared overhead to the Normandy landing zones. They were a fraction of the air armadas of 13,000 aircrafts that would support D-Day. Now, the landings. The airborne troops were the vanguard, and their landings were a heartening success. The American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions dropped into a deliberately unattended zone at the base of the continent peninsula, suffered many casualties by drowning, but nevertheless secured their objective. The British 6th Airborne Division seized its unfloated objectives in the eastern end more easily, and its Special Task Force also captured key bridges over the Cannon Canal and Orborne River. When the seaborne units began to land about 6:30 a.m. on June 6th, the British and Canadians on Gold, Juno, and Sword branches overcame light opposition. So did the Americans in Utah. The U.S. 1st Division at Omaha Beach, however, confronted the best of the German Coast Division, the 352nd, and was roughly handled by machine gunners as the troops waded ashore. During the morning, the landing at Omaha threatened to fail. Only dedicated local leadership eventually got the troops inland, through, though at a cost of more than 2,000 casualties. The German response. Meanwhile, excuse me, the German High Command, in the absence of Rommel, who was home on leave, began to respond. Hitler was initially unwilling to release the armored divisions for a counterattack. When he relented after midday, elements of the 21st Panzer Division drove into the gap between the British 3rd and Canadian 3rd Division at Sword Beach and Juno Beach, and almost reached the sea. Had they done so, the landing might have failed. Fierce resistance by British anti-tank gunners at Piers-sur-la-Lidan turned the tide in late evening. Carrington during World War II. U.S. troops passed through Carrington, France, an important objective of the Allies during the Normandy invasion of June of 1944. On June 7th, the beachhead consisted of 3 separate sectors: that of the British and Canadians between cannon not taken by Baxen, that of the U.S. V Corps between Port and Benson and Saint-Pierre-de-Mont, and that of the U.S. 7th Corps west of the Vere River behind Utah Beach. The narrow gap between Gold and Omaha at Port and Benson was quickly closed, but it was not until June 12th that the American corps were able to join hands after a bitter battle to capture Carrington. The beachhead then formed a continuous zone, its deepest point being southwest of Baix, where the 5th Corps had driven nearly 15 miles or 25 kilometers inland. Mulberry artifacts harbor during the Normandy invasions. Ambulances on a whale floater pier of the Mulberry artificially harbored near Archimedes, France during the Normandy invasion of World War II. Meanwhile, work had been proceeding pell-mell to complete 2 artificial harbors, known by the codenames Mulberry, that were intended to offload vehicles and supplies until the port of Cherbourg was secured. An outer breakwater of sunken ships for each harbor was in place by June 11th. Floating piers designed to rise and fall with the tides were half finished by June 19th. When a heavy storm destroyed such of the material, the Americans then decided to abandon their Mulberry, while the British harbor was not in use until July. Most supplies, meanwhile, had to be beach landed by assorted landing crafts, landing ships, and amphibious trucks. Fighting in the bow cage. Fighting inshore, the Allies also encountered difficulty in the dense hedgerow country known to the French as boy cage. Thanks to the success of the airborne landings, the flanks of the beachhead were firmly held, but efforts to break out of the center were frustrated by a fierce German resistance and counterattacks. Partially around Cannon in the British-Canadian sector, the British armored thrust at Villers Bocage was defeated on June 13th. A large-scale infantry offense west of Cannon called Operation Epsom was also defeated on June 25th to June 29th. There was a gloom of Seif. It seemed that the stalemate was descending. The gloom was deepened by Montgomery's strategy. His plan was to draw German armor towards the British front and win the battle of attraction between tank forces. The successful German defense, however, led the Americans to doubt the plan's viability. In fact, the Germans were also depressed, for their bitter defense was using up men and equipment that could not be replaced. Moreover, the Americans were now able to profit from the deployment of most of the enemy's armor against the British and break into the base of the Canteen Peninsula and advance on Cherbourg, the last basin in the heavily fortified city. Fell on June 28th, and clearance of the port began at once. Now, there was a crisis in the German command. The setbacks brought about a crisis in the German high command, which in any case now suffered unforeseeable casualties. Dolman, commander of the 7th Army, died suddenly on June 28th, just after the surrender of the main garrison in Cherbourg. His death was blamed on a heart attack, though it was quite likely he committed suicide. Rommel was severely injured when his car was strafed by a British fighter on July 17th. Worst of all, Rundstedt confessed defeatism to Hitler, urging him to make peace, and was dismissed on July 2nd along with Gier, the commander of Panzer Group West. Gier was replaced by the capable veteran Heinrich Eberbach. Rundstedt himself was replaced by Gunther von Klung, who soon came round to sharing Rundstedt's doubt. On July 20th, a conspiracy of officers, including former Army Chief of Staff Ludwig Beck and Reserve Army Chief of Staff Klaus Kortschek von Stauffenberger, who believed the only hope of securing peace lay in Hitler's removal, made an attempt on his life at his East Prison headquarters, or Persian headquarters, Ratzenberg. The failure of the July plot led to Hitler's taking draconian powers over the army and execute terrible revenge on those suspected of complacency. Rommel was forced to commit suicide in October, and Klung did so on August 18th. The German defense of Normandy had by then taken a turn for the worse. The large British armored offensive west of Cannon, Operation Goodwood, failed on July 18th and July 19th. The U.S. First Army conducted a bitter battle of attrition around St. Louis in the second and third weeks of July. Its success was to lay the basis for the long-awaited breakout. On July 25th, with most of the German tanks drawn westward by the British Goodwood offensive, the Americans faced a front almost denuded of armor. Reinforcement gave them a clear superiority in tank and infantry division, while the Allied expeditionary force had the bombardment power to devise the Germans in their path. Operation Cobra, scheduled for July 25th, opened with a devastating air attack, some of which fell on the waiting GIs. Through the gap thus opened, the U.S. First Army sped towards Avarches, taken on July 30th. At this point, George S. Patton's newly formed Third Army joined in the advance. A massive American spearhead now threatened to drive into Brittany, and by a left turn to encircle the Germans and Normandy from the rear. The German counterattack and Fallacy Pocket. Hitler saw the breakout and as an opportunity to restore the front, bringing the 2nd, 116th, and 1st and 2nd Panzer SS Division hastily westward. He issued orders for Operation Lichitz. Designed to drive behind the point of American spearhead and reach the sea at Avarches. However, ultra interceptions of German cipher traffic alerted the Americans to the danger, and when Lichitz opened on August 7th, heavy anti-tank defenses were in place. The offense was stopped and defeated in its tracks. Meanwhile, as the American encirclement eastward from Brittany developed, the British and Americans began a strong advance west of Caen toward Phalcis. On August 16th, the day after a Franco-American force had landed on the Rivera, also known as Operation Dragoon, Hitler at last recognized the inevitable and gave permission for a withdrawal from Normandy. The only route of escape lay through the gap between the converging American and British spearheads at Fosses. The position efforts, the remnants of German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, the latter now led by one of Hitler's top tank commanders, Joseph Sepp Dietrich, succeeded in breaking through between August 16th and August 19th. Some 240,000 men, bereft of equipment, eventually reached the Seine River. They left behind in Normandy some 50,000 dead and 200,000 taken prisoner. Crossing the Seine, by 1944, the Germans, after 2 years of withdrawals in Russia, were expert at organizing retreats. They showed their expertise in the Seine River crossing, though all bridges had been destroyed by Allied air attacks. They improvised platoons and ferries and conducted skillful regarding actions to hold off the Anglo-American advances. Between August 19th and 31st, when all survivors were rescued by the Allies commanded in the West Bank of Seine from the sea to Fontainebleau, while the spearhead were on Mesure River, 186 miles or 299 kilometers further on. The architect of the German withdrawal was Field Marshal Walter Model, the Fuhrer's fireman, a veteran of the Eastern Front, had succeeded Klug on August 17th. World War II liberation of Paris. Jacques Philippe Leclerc, during the Liberation of Paris, August of 1944, as model drew the retreating German back across the northern France at breakneck speed into Belgium. Resistance forces in Paris rose against what remained of the German garrison there on August 19th. Fighting broke out, and as news of the struggle reached the public in America and Britain, Eisenhower reserved his earlier decision to bypass the capital. They recently arrived Free French 2nd Armored Division was ordered to liberate the city. Its vanguards arrived on August 24th. The next morning, the German city commander, Dietrich von Koltz, surrendered to the resistance, and Jacques Philippe Leclerc, the second armored commander. On August 26th, General Charles de Gaulle, head of the Free French, made a triumphal parade down the Champs-Élysées to Notre Dame Cathedral, where a massive victory was celebrated. Liberation had come at a high cost. More than 200,000 dead, wounded, and missing from the Allied armies, more than 300,000 from the German. French civilian losses numbered more than 12 million. Still, the Normandy campaign had been a stunning success. By early September of 1944, all but a fraction of France had been liberated. The US, British, and Canadian forces had occupied Belgium and part of the Netherlands and had reached the German frontier. They had, however, outrun their logistical support and lacked the strength to launch a accumulating offensive. The coming winter would see much harder fighting and a German counter-offensive in the Belgium Andries. The Battle of Bulge before the German army in the West was finally to be beaten. And after I had mentioned Eisenhower, I think it was Eisenhower. Anyway, the President of the United States during World War II, we will get into him when we do up that president. I want to say it was Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower. So whenever I say, like, let's say use 15 miles or 25 kilometers, here in America, we use miles, and I know other countries use kilometers. So I always want to use both so everyone has an understanding. 15 miles is roughly 25 miles. There's like a special math that they figure out, it's 15 miles down to 1 mile is equivalent to this in centimeters, and then it converts from centimeters to kilometers. Confusing. So whenever I say or try to explain, it's this in miles and this in kilometers, I want to try and include everyone. So everyone has an understanding, 15 miles is this in, or a mile is this in kilometers, or vice versa. 25 miles is 15, or 25 kilometers is 15 miles. So everyone has like an understanding of what I'm trying to say. Now, I don't know anyone personally that fought in World War II or was alive during that time, due to it being, 80 years? Roughly 80 years, about 80-ish years ago. Oh, as soon as we get to President Eisenhower, who is our I want to say 20th president. Don't quote me on that. I'm right now looking up which president, like which number he was. I will get into more detail about that. Let's do it this way. Eisenhower was our 34th president. So as soon as we get to our 34th president, which we are roughly at '19. As soon as we get to our 33rd president, I will bring up about how most likely I'll bring up that we will be getting into World War II. And with that, I will see you all in the next one.